Welcome to Crime Clueless. We're your hosts. I'm Jenna.
And I'm Kayla.
Today, we are starting a new series that I'm super excited about that Kayla has agreed to cover with me.
I'm excited.
They should be good. We've been thinking, what makes a killer kill? Is it nature, nurture, a deep-seated urge, or a calculated choice? Welcome to Inside the Mind of a Serial Killer, where we will pull back the curtain on the most chilling criminal minds in history. We'll explore childhoods, triggers, motives, diving deep into what drove them to the unthinkable. Buckle up, because this journey into darkness is maybe not for the faint of heart. Let's get inside the mind and see what lurks within. You ready?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. I didn't feel guilty for anything. It was like my mind was blank, nothing. That was how Jeffrey Dahmer described what he felt after his murders. No remorse, no hesitation, just nothing. How does someone reach that level of detachment? What makes a serial killer different from the rest of us? Were they born that way, or did something twist them? Tonight, we're diving into the psychology of serial killers, which will be part 1 of our series. What drives them, what patterns they follow, and whether they can be stopped before they kill again. So, Kayla, are you ready to get inside the mind of a serial killer?
I mean, am I ready? No, but definitely fascinated and slightly nervous. So let's do it.
Great. What defines a serial killer? Before we start breaking down what's going on inside the mind of a serial killer, let's get something straight. What actually makes someone a serial killer? Because despite what Hollywood makes you think, not every murderer is a serial killer, and not every serial killer fits the slasher movie stereotype.
Yeah, I mean, if you go purely based off pop culture, you think serial killers are all, masked lunatics running around through the woods with chainsaws.
Mm-hmm.
But, I mean, what's the reality there?
Yeah, exactly. So the FBI defines a serial killer as someone who has committed at least 3 separate murders in different locations with a cooling off period in between. That's what separates them from mass murderers who kill multiple people in one event, or spree killers who kill multiple people in a short period but without the break between.
So that cooling off period, that's the key difference there?
Exactly. It's the time in between the killings where they go back to their normal lives. Some of them even have families, jobs, function in society like nothing ever happened. Ted Bundy worked at a crisis hotline. Dennis Rader, who was BTK, he was a church leader and a compliance officer. John Wayne Gacy, the dude dressed up as a clown for children's parties. You've got Israel Keyes, who had a daughter, a girlfriend, a whole family, and his business trips or visiting family, that's when he killed. These people don't always look like serial killers.
That's so scary. I mean, they blend in. No one suspects them. I mean, you could be friends with a serial killer.
Right. And that's terrifying.
Yeah. No, thank you.
Not all serial killers are the same. The FBI actually breaks them into different types based on why they kill. Some do it for pleasure. Some think they have a mission. Others just want control. And that's what we're going to get into next.
The thing you said at the beginning where he just felt nothing is so wild to me, because I'm like, oh, I accidentally said something wrong to someone 5 years ago and I'm going to think about it for the next 10 years.
Right. I mean, it's impossible to figure out how they think that way.
It's just so foreign to me, which, I mean, I guess is a good thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's so crazy to think about.
It is. And that coupled with it could be your next door neighbor is mind-boggling.
This is why I'm single.
I could understand that. Yeah.
No, thank you.
No. All right. So we've established what makes a serial killer. Now we get to the big question. Are they born or do they become this way?
Ooh, the age-old debate, nature versus nurture.
Right. And the answer, well, It's complicated. Let's start with the nature side of things. Scientists have actually studied the brains of serial killers. They found some pretty disturbing stuff. Many of them show abnormalities in two major areas of the brain, the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex.
Okay, I don't know what that means, so let's break that down.
The amygdala, in my head, I can say it.
Yeah.
The amygdala is the part of your brain that processes emotion. It processes fear, guilt, empathy. In normal people, this part lights up when you see something upsetting or violent. In many serial killers, it's either shrunken, damaged, or completely underactive.
So they really don't feel things like we do.
Right. And then there's the prefrontal cortex, which controls impulse control and decision making. Studies show that many violent criminals have less activity in this part of the brain. They also are able to see some sort of traumatic injury in a lot of their pasts that they can then correlate. With the prefrontal cortex, that means that they struggle with controlling their urges, whether that's rage, aggression, or even something as simple as resisting temptation.
If someone has all of these abnormalities, does that generally mean that they're going to potentially be a serial killer, or does that just happen to be something that they've noticed when they're studying them?
Yeah, the second one. There are a lot of people with similar brain structures who never kill, which is the tricky part. So you can't look at someone's brain and know that that's related, right?
Right.
And that's where nurture comes in, the environment they grew up in, their childhood experiences, and maybe what pushes them over the edge.
So I know we've both watched Dexter, so it's interesting thinking about that because, season one, they talk about him seeing his mom get murdered, and then him and his brother are both serial killers. So, I mean, I think that's a good kind of representation of childhood trauma that can manifest in this way.
Absolutely. So we'll talk about that exactly. And it gets really interesting. A huge number of serial killers had brutal childhoods, abuse, neglect, trauma, like seeing, someone you love get murdered. Some of them went through things so awful, it's almost like maybe being engineered to become killers.
Yeah, I mean, we talk so much about how your trauma manifests. So, I mean, unfortunately, that makes sense. But who are some examples of this?
Oh, good question. So Ed Kemper, this guy was horrifically abused by his mother. She locked him in a dark basement. She degraded him, told him he was worthless. By the time he was a teenager, he had already murdered his grandparents. Then there's Henry Lee Lucas, whose mother forced him to watch her have sex with clients, dressed him as a girl, and beat him constantly.
Oh, that's terrible.
It's really sad to hear about their childhood, and I feel like there's this separation where you hear about their childhood and you feel bad for them, but then there are people that had the same childhood that didn't grow up to do what they do. So I think it's okay to feel bad for the child.
Yeah.
And then to condemn what they do later on in life, right?
Yeah, of course.
Another example would be Richard Ramirez. His older cousin literally showed him graphic Polaroids of women he had murdered in Vietnam when Richard was only 12 years old. And then the same cousin murdered his wife in front of him, which I don't know how that wouldn't warp a kid's mind,
Yeah, I mean, you hear stuff like that, and it's almost like, how could you not turn into a serial killer or, just have those violent tendencies?
Right. So that's where the debate comes in. Did their brains already predispose them to violence? Or did their childhoods create monsters? Some people think that it's the perfect storm of both. If someone has the genetic predisposition towards aggression, and then they're raised in a violent, abusive home, maybe that's what causes them to cross that line, right?
What would be so interesting, and I know we'll never be able to see this, but it would be interesting if they had a scan of someone's brain, before and after.
Oh, yeah.
In a traumatizing event that happened to them, to kind of see how that actually affects their brain.
I wonder if that exists. Maybe somebody who did have a fall that had a scan and it wasn't anything.
Yeah.
And then maybe it was in a car accident or something. and busted their prefrontal cortex.
Yeah, I think that would be so interesting to see.
Mhm. So to complicate this even further, the nature versus nurture, there's also something called a serial killer gene.
What's that? Is that a real thing?
Kind of. Scientists have studied something called the MAOA gene, which is sometimes nicknamed the warrior gene. It's linked to higher aggression and violent behavior, especially in people who have had abusive childhoods.
Does that mean that they could test people for the killer gene and predict if a kid is going to grow up to be a murderer? Like, that's so weird.
Right? Of course, it's not black and white, and having the gene doesn't make you a serial killer. In fact, there are plenty of normal people who have it, but when we take that, we combine it with childhood trauma or brain injuries. We've got a lack of empathy, violent tendencies. That's when things can get scary.
So it's not really born or made. It's kind of a mix of both.
Yeah, that's what scientists have concluded. Some people might have the brain of a killer but never act on it. Others are raised in a horrible environment but never cross the line. But then when someone has both, that's when we see killers like Ted Bundy, Jeffrey Dahmer, Richard Ramirez, BTK. So there's one more thing that scientists have studied that is kind of a predictor, even just for violence or other tendencies, aggression later on in life, and it's called the McDonald triad, which are childhood signs of a serial killer.
I don't think I've ever heard of that before.
We've talked about the different things with nature and nurture, but another question that ties in is, can we see the warning signs early? Are there behaviors that might predict whether someone is going to grow up to be a murderer? And the McDonald triad was introduced back in 1963. A psychiatrist named J.M. McDonald proposed a theory that 3 specific behaviors in childhood might predict violent tendencies later in life.
So I'm guessing these aren't things like didn't share their toys in kindergarten or was like a bully in middle school or something.
Right, no. The 3 behaviors he identified are bedwetting, fire starting, and animal cruelty.
That's interesting. I mean, I see fire starting and animal cruelty, but, walk me through why it's all 3 of those that could be warning signs.
The first behavior, bedwetting, past the normal age. We're talking about kids who wet the bed well into their teens.
But why is that connected to violence?
The theory that scientists have proposed is that chronic bedwetting can lead to severe humiliation, especially if the child is punished or shamed for it. That kind of deep embarrassment and frustration can manifest as anger or aggression towards others.
Okay, so it's not actually like the act itself, it's how it kind of affects them psychologically. So it seems like maybe if their family is humiliating them for that or something.
Exactly. Many serial killers reported horrible child abuse that involved being punished or mocked for bedwetting. For example, Henry Lee Lucas, his mother forced him to wear girls' clothing to school and would beat him senseless when he wet the bed.
That's so,
I know.
so sad.
It's such a weird thing to feel so bad for these serial killers as kids, right?
Yes.
There's also Otis Toole, who was regularly beaten for bedwetting by his own grandmother, who, by the way, also allegedly made him dig graves as a kid.
Made him dig graves? Like
Yeah.
for people she murdered or just for fun in the backyard? Or did she work at a cemetery? Like,
I mean, any way you slice it, that's traumatic.
yeah. You ever watch Rick and Morty?
I love Rick and Morty.
There's the one episode. It's so sad, but like they mess up their world so much that they have to go find a new one. And there's like the scene of them like digging the graves in the backyard for themselves.
Yes. Okay, so with Henry Lee Lucas, he was forced to dig graves as punishment and a way to instill fear in him. He grew up in extreme poverty, and what a way to punish your kid. I mean,
so she was making him dig his own grave, basically?
That's kind of what it sounds like.
Wow. Okay,
Yeah.
so she was terrible.
Yep, she was terrible. And with the bedwetting, the frustration, the powerlessness, the rage that all built up, for any of these serial killers that can get turned outward, especially when combined with the other two behaviors in the triad.
Yeah.
So the second sign is fire starting. And I don't mean a kid who lights a candle and stares at it. I mean an obsession with setting things on fire just to watch them burn.
So what's the connection between, fire and violent behavior?
I found this really interesting. Fire gives a sense of control. A lot of kids who become arsonists have felt powerless in their own lives, and fire is a way for them to feel powerful. It's also linked to a lack of empathy because they don't care if the fire destroys property or hurts someone.
Okay, that makes sense.
For example, David Berkowitz, the son of Sam, he set over 1,400 fires around New York before he ever killed anyone. And he kept detailed records of every single one.
Wow. So for him, the thrill wasn't just about the fire itself. It was about watching all of that destruction.
Exactly. It's the idea that you can cause chaos and no one can stop you. We see this pattern over and over. Bruce George Peter Lee, a British serial arsonist who also killed 26 people, and Carl Panzram, who burned down a warehouse just because he was bored, both started out with fire before they moved on to murder.
Oh, interesting.
So then the last one, which this one is so sad, animal cruelty. It's the last piece of the McDonald triad, probably the most disturbing.
Yeah, I think that's the one that I know the most. I think that's the one that's portrayed in movies and TV shows so often, is that piece of it.
Right.
But I just, that's so horrible. If you're torturing animals as a kid, that's definitely a major red flag.
100%. And here's why. Hurting an animal isn't just random aggression. It shows a complete lack of empathy because animals are defenseless. A kid who enjoys causing pain to an animal is testing their ability to exert power over another living thing.
Ugh. I'm guessing there are a lot of serial killers who had that pattern then.
Oh, yeah. Jeffrey Dahmer started dissecting animals as a kid before he then did that to humans. Edmund Kemper, before he murdered his mother, he cut off the heads of his sister's dolls and also buried family pets alive. And then we have Albert DeSalvo, who's the Boston Strangler. He would trap dogs and cats in wooden crates and shoot arrows at them.
Oh, that is genuinely horrifying.
It is. And it's not just about violence for a lot of these. Many of these killers started small and then escalated. They used animals basically as practice for what they would later do to people.
Ugh, that's so terrible.
Right.
So, I mean, we've talked about the triad. If a kid wets the bed, sets fires, and, is cruel to animals, does that kind of guarantee that they're going to be a killer?
I mean, of course, like all the others, not necessarily. The McDonald triad isn't a hard rule, and a lot of psychologists debate its accuracy. Plenty of kids wet the bed or mess around with fires, and never become violent criminals.
So what makes the difference there? Because, I mean, it seems like wetting the bed or maybe playing with fire, those are kind of kid things. Not that any of us ever, played with fire, but I mean, I think it's something that's maybe interesting,
sure,
to younger people, and, they never become violent criminals. So what's the difference there?
It's when these behaviors are paired with these other red flags like antisocial behavior, extreme aggression, childhood abuse, those nature nurture things we talked about. So you can think about it like this. Not every kid who lights a match becomes an arsonist, but every arsonist started with a match.
Okay, that's a great way to put it.
Yeah, so if the McDonald triad isn't the perfect indicator and the nature versus nurture, emotional trauma, things like that, how do we actually spot and catch serial killers? We're going to get into that in this series. Next, we'll talk about the 5 types of serial killers and what drives them.
Ooh, all right. I'm interested to learn.
5 types. Not all serial killers are the same. They don't all kill for the same reason, and they don't all operate the same way. That's where the FBI comes in. They actually categorize serial killers into 5 different types based on their motives.
So I'm guessing none of those categories are totally normal, misunderstood guy just trying to figure things out.
Not quite. Let's start with the first, and honestly, one of the most disturbing types of serial killers, in my opinion, which would be visionary killers. For visionary killers, they are the ones who think they're killing for a purpose. You know, think season, 7 of Dexter? The religion guy,
yes,
right?
Yes.
Yeah. They often hear voices or believe they're carrying out some kind of divine, supernatural, or otherworldly mission. In other words, they're completely detached from reality.
These ones feel like they kill because they have to.
Exactly. Take David Berkowitz, the son of Sam. He claimed a demon was in his neighbor's dog, telling him to kill. Then you've got Herbert Mullen, who was convinced he had to kill to prevent earthquakes. He thought the earth was literally demanding human sacrifices to stop natural disasters.
Oh, geez. I mean, you've got to imagine the FBI doesn't have a how to reason with a guy who thinks the earth is talking to him playbook.
No, they don't. And one thing that makes visionary killers so terrifying is that they do genuinely believe what they're doing is necessary, which means they don't usually feel guilt or any kind of remorse.
Well, yeah, when the neighbor's dog tells you have to, I mean, you've got to, right?
You've got to. And I guess if you're sacrificing one person to save 1,000 in an earthquake,
you're doing the right thing.
Or maybe we need you to go live somewhere else.
Well, or that.
Yeah, get some help. The second type is mission-oriented killers. Their thought is they're cleansing society. They're similar to visionary killers. They're mission-oriented who also believe that they have a greater purpose. But instead of hearing voices, they see themselves as taking out people they think deserve to die.
So they're generally targeting like a specific group of people?
Exactly. Think of Jack Unterweger, who specifically targeted sex workers because he thought they were quote unquote unclean. Or Joseph Paul Franklin, who went after people based on race and religion because he had such an extremist ideology.
So they're fixing the world in their own twisted way.
Right. And they rarely stop unless they're caught because in their mind, they're doing what needs to be done.
That's, I mean, there's no reasoning with that.
No. It's same with the first one, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. The third type is hedonistic killers, and they kill for pleasure. And these are just plain evil. They are the ones who kill for fun, for excitement, or sexual pleasure. They don't believe they're on some kind of mission. They just enjoy it.
This is terrifying to me.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like this is where we're going to start to get into some of those household name serial killers.
Mm-hmm. You've got Ted Bundy, Jeffrey Dahmer, Israel Keys, Richard Ramirez. These ones hunt their victims. They kill just for the thrill of it. Some, like Dahmer, took it even further. He didn't just kill, he wanted total control over his victims after death. That's why he kept trophies and why he experimented on bodies.
Ugh, it's so creepy to me.
Mm-hmm.
These are the guys then who just kind of get a rush from murder.
Exactly. Some enjoy the act of killing. Others enjoy the power they have over their victims. But either way, these are the ones who have zero empathy, zero remorse, and will kill again and again.
No, thank you.
Number 4 is power control, basically puppet masters.
Okay.
So hedonistic killers enjoy the act of murder, but power control killers, they enjoy the buildup. For them, it's not about the kill itself. It's about the fact that they're in complete control of someone's life.
We're looking more at psychological dominance?
Yes. So Dennis Rader, BTK, is textbook example of this. He loved taunting his victims before and after their deaths. He wrote letters to the police, bragging about how clever he was. And it wasn't about the method of killing. It was about the fact that he had complete power over another person.
I know with serial killers, they tend to kill in the same manner. But you're saying, like, for him, it wasn't about the method of killing. Did he follow the same kind of pattern? Or was it just whatever was maybe the most taunting for that person? Or do you know that?
Yeah, I mean, the BTK stands for bind, torture, kill.
Oh,
He
did not know that.
He was, bind, torture, kill. That's, I think, what he named himself.
Okay.
And so there were some aspects always, but then there were some where he would use a gun or he would use something different like strangle.
Okay.
But the lead up still was seemingly the same.
Okay. So for them, the kill then is just kind of the end of a game that they've been playing.
Exactly. They drag it out. They tend to make their victims suffer, and sometimes they keep trophies or mementos so they can relive that moment over and over.
Oh.
Yeah. The fifth kind is lust killers, and this category overlaps with hedonistic killers, but it's distinct enough to be its own thing. Just killers. These are the ones who experience sexual arousal through violence and murder.
Oh, I hate this one.
So me too.
Well, I mean, I hate them all, but this
yeah.
one is, ugh. You're saying that their crimes are kind of driven by a combination of desire and violence.
Exactly. Think of Jack the Ripper, whose crimes were heavily sexualized, or Ted Bundy, who admitted he had an uncontrollable urge that he had to act on. These killers, they get off on pain, fear, and suffering of their victims.
I'm guessing there's no way to treat that kind of compulsion.
Right. No, not that they've really found yet.
Obviously, the one I know about the most would be Ted Bundy.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's been so many shows. I almost kind of wonder if that's better or worse that there's so many shows about them. I don't know.
I don't know how I feel about that.
I never watched it, but the show Monster about Jeffrey Dahmer, like, I feel like there were a lot of mixed reviews.
Yeah.
Because it seemed almost kind of like
humanizing him.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And same with the Ted Bundy one,
Yeah.
They have Zac Efron play him.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, well, do you now feel bad for them or see them in a different way?
Yeah.
I don't know. We can dig into that on another deep
we
dive.
should.
I think we should too. All right. So now that we know what could create a killer, the next question is, do all killers follow the same patterns? The FBI actually believes that they do. Up next, we'll talk about the phases of a serial killer. Here's the thing. Serial killers don't just wake up one day and randomly kill someone. There's a process, a cycle they go through over and over again.
It's like a pattern, almost kind of like a ritual.
Exactly. The FBI has identified a set of phases that serial killers typically follow when they commit their crimes. Not all serial killers go through every phase, and not all of them follow the exact same order, but the general structure is the same. These phases are the fantasy stage, the hunting phase, the capture phase, the kill, and the cooling off period.
Cool. Terrifying already. Let's go through those.
All right. The fantasy stage. Before a serial killer ever commits a crime, it starts in their mind long before they take action. They're already imagining the kill.
It's kind of like an obsession that builds up over time.
Exactly. Many serial killers report having violent fantasies for years before they commit their first murder. These fantasies often start small: control, domination, violence, and then they escalate.
Do we know what pushes them from, just thinking about it to actually going through with it?
It depends. Some killers need a trigger event, something in their life that pushes them over the edge, like a major failure, a rejection, some kind of trauma that ignites their rage. Others can't resist the urge anymore.
Like Jeffrey Dahmer. I mean, he said he was thinking about murder for years before he actually did it, right?
Mm-hmm. Dahmer fantasized about total control over another person since he was a teenager. He didn't act on it right away, but the thought was always there, getting stronger and stronger. Once the fantasy isn't enough anymore, the killer moves into the hunting phase. This is where they're actively looking for their first or next victim.
So, we've talked about the different types of killers, and this is the same for any of them. They don't just kind of kill who's ever around. They are searching for the right, quote unquote, victim.
Right. And I think this is one thing that kind of sets serial killers apart from other killers.
Okay.
Most of the time, this is where we start to see a pattern in how they choose their victim. For example, Ted Bundy specifically targeted young brunette women who looked like his ex-girlfriend. Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker, had no fixed type, but he stalked neighborhoods looking for open windows and unlocked doors.
Okay.
And then Dennis Rader, BTK, picked victims by watching them for weeks, learning their routines, things like that before striking. Some killers hunt in public places like bars or parks. Others break into homes and take control. But in every case, there's a deliberate choice being made.
Yeah, this is just kind of making me think of season 3 of Dexter, the Trinity Killer,
Oh
and
my gosh.
watching him select. I mean, he had very specific targets that he picked, and watching how he picked those and followed them and stuff. That's kind of what I'm picturing in my mind right now.
Someone like his mom, someone like his sister.
Yeah.
Right.
Someone like him and his dad. Yeah.
Yep. And how he was when he was young.
Right. At this point, when they're in the hunting phase, they're basically just playing a terrifying game of who's my next victim.
Pretty much. And once they found that perfect victim, they move on to the next phase, which is the capture phase. This is the part where the killers put their plan into action. Some serial killers physically abduct their victims, while others manipulate them into coming willingly.
So that'd be like Ted Bundy faking an injury to get women to help him?
Exactly. He would wear a fake cast or a sling and ask women for help lifting something into his car. Once they got close, he'd knock them out and put them in the car. Other killers use tricks to get into homes, like posing as salesmen or delivery workers. And then you've got someone like Ed Kemper, who literally befriended police officers and used that trust to his advantage.
Terrifying.
Mm-hmm.
At this point, this is where the victim is trapped, so physically or psychologically.
Right. And for the killer, this phase is just as thrilling as the actual murder because it's about control. Once they've captured their victim, they move on to the most horrific part, the kill. This is the moment everything has been building towards, the murder itself. And here's what's chilling. For most serial killers, the actual kill isn't just about death, it's about power.
So the way that they murder, their killing method, it kind of says a lot about them, like about their character and kind of what they're looking for then.
Absolutely. Some killers drag it out because they like to savor that. BTK would torture his victims for hours. Others kill quickly and efficiently, like hitman-style killers who don't prolong the suffering.
Ugh. And then there are the ones you said who take souvenirs sometimes.
Yep. Many serial killers keep trophies, things like jewelry, locks of hair, even body parts, because they want to relive the experience over and over again. It's all about owning the moment.
Ugh, that's creepy.
It's awful. After the kill, you would think a serial killer would go into hiding, right? Lay low. But for many of them, they actually return to their normal lives. Some go back to work, visit family, even watch the news coverage of their own crime. It's like they compartmentalize it, acting like nothing ever happened.
Is that usually the phase where they get caught?
Sometimes. But here's the scary part. Many don't get caught during their first kill. The cooling off period can last weeks, months, even years. For example, BTK killed for decades before being caught. Israel Keys killed, maybe 10, 15 years.
Wow.
And Israel Keys wasn't even on the radar.
Really?
He messed up on his last one, and he thought they knew about his others, and he accidentally let it slip. It's the only way.
So they didn't even know, when they caught him, they didn't realize that he was a serial killer. They thought he had just murdered one person?
Yep.
Wow.
And they actually don't even know how many still.
Oh, lovely. That's creepy.
Yeah, he completed suicide in prison. And so now we're just left with lots of questions.
Yeah.
There's a really good podcast called True Crime Bullshit that is 6 seasons right now. I think a 7th is coming out. And it's all about Israel Keys.
Really?
It's really good. Yeah.
So once they've kind of cooled off and is that when the whole cycle starts again then? Are they just like tired of not feeling those feelings and they want to feel it again?
Mm-hmm. I think for a lot of them, they're so much more calculated and they have the reasoning where, especially in the beginning, I think, where they're not going to do it again too soon. So it doesn't look like a pattern. They're going back to normal life, right?
Yeah.
And if they have a job where they don't have breaks for a while, then they'll wait till they have a break. Or you've got Ted Bundy, who eventually escalated to killing multiple victims in one day. So that cooling off period can be, like we said, really long and can grow shorter, or it can get longer. BTK didn't kill anyone for a long time before he was caught.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Something that I have a question on, when we talk about the psychology, there's also a lot that they talk about with sociopath or, psychopathic tendencies.
Mm-hmm.
Do most of the serial killers fall under one of those two categories? Is there one that they fall under more often than the other?
Yeah, that's a great question. A good number of serial killers are psychopaths. Psychopaths are less impulsive. They're highly calculated, organized, manipulative, where sociopaths are erratic and they're reactive.
So a psychopath would be a serial killer, and maybe like a sociopath would be more someone who just goes on like a random murder spree.
Mm-hmm.
We talked about in one of our cases, I think it was Robin, where he just left for the night. He just wanted to kill someone.
Right.
So would that technically fall more under sociopath and psychopath?
Right. Yes.
Okay.
But he does have some of the psychopath tendencies, like feeling no guilt and a little bit detached.
Mm-hmm.
In that case, they also categorized Richard Ramirez as a sociopath and more of like a violent, reckless killer, which led to him getting arrested when he did, as opposed to some like Israel Keys, BTK, Ted Bundy are categorized as psychopaths, and that helps them evade capture for a lot longer.
Okay. That's interesting.
It is, and it's terrifying.
Yeah.
Yeah. The cycle of serial killers is never random. It's a step-by-step process. It's just that time in between, or, how they pick their victims, some of those things can change. But some serial killers go through this phase dozens of times before they're eventually caught. The next question is, how do we stop them? We've covered everything: how serial killers are created, how they hunt, how they kill, how they cycle through their crimes. But now the big question, can we stop them before they start? Is there a way to prevent a killer from ever taking their first life, or are people simply wired for murder?
Well, I mean, I feel like that answer should almost be yes, but I mean, given how many serial killers slip through the cracks, and, we've said that even if they do have some of those tendencies, they don't become serial killers.
Mm-hmm.
Guessing it's really not that simple.
Right. Very murky. Definitely not simple. The truth is, we've had killers in custody before they ever took a life, and we still let them go. There have been cases where police, teachers, parents all saw the warning signs and nothing was done. But what do you do?
Yeah, and I don't think you necessarily want to believe that your child is or could be
your
capable.
Student, or
yeah. I mean, if a kid is just playing with matches, you don't want to be like, oh, they're going to be a serial killer. Let's
right,
put that on them.
Right. No. Let's take that and start with the question of prediction. Can we spot a future serial killer before they commit a crime?
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about the McDonald triad. Doesn't that kind of give us some early warning signs?
I mean, yes and no. That McDonald triad, bedwetting, fire starting, and animal cruelty show potential early indicators, but it's not a guarantee, of course. Plenty of kids who exhibit the behaviors never go on to kill. And there are serial killers who didn't show all three. The better indicators are patterns of escalating violence, lack of empathy, repeated antisocial behavior. And of course, the problem, a lot of those things don't become obvious until it's too late, till we're looking at it in hindsight.
So we're Waiting for them to get worse before stepping in.
In many cases, yeah. And that's a huge flaw in how we deal with violent behavior.
Yeah.
There are some absolutely infuriating cases where killers showed every red flag, even got arrested, sometimes multiple times. Of course, they're let go. Let's go through a couple of those.
I know this is already going to make me angry.
Oh, it will. Let's start with Jeffrey Dahmer. Did you know police literally returned one of his victims to him?
Wait, what?
Yeah. There was a 14-year-old boy who escaped from Dahmer's apartment, ran into the street, was found by police. He was bleeding. He'd been drugged. Dahmer convinced the cops that it was a lover's quarrel, air quotes. So they handed the boy back to him. An hour later, he was dead. And this was after Dahmer had already been arrested for sexually assaulting another teen. He should have never even been free in the first place.
Police literally handed a victim back to the serial killer because they didn't want to get involved in domestic issues, even though this was a 14-year-old.
He was really tall. There was some racial bias going on, and it's so heartbreaking.
That is so terrible. It's so
Mhm.
sad and just completely infuriating.
Yeah, agreed.
So let's say that we do catch these people early. Have they seen that, therapy or intervention can actually change their behavior?
Unfortunately, in most cases, no.
Okay.
Psychopaths and sociopaths, the groups that, serial killers mostly fall into, don't respond to therapy the way normal people do. They don't feel guilt. They don't form emotional connections. Unfortunately, traditional treatment methods don't seem to work so far.
I mean, that makes sense
Mhm.
because if they don't have that empathy, then they're just going to say whatever
Right.
to get back to and to make the therapist think that they're okay. It seems from what you're saying, there's really no way to quote unquote fix them.
Right. Not really. And in some cases, therapy can make things worse.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Take Ed Kemper. He was sent to a juvenile psychiatric treatment after killing his grandparents. And you know what happened? He got better at manipulating people. He learned how to act, quote unquote, normal to fool doctors. They thought he was rehabilitated and they let him go early. Within a few years, he was killing again, except now he was even smarter about it.
It's frustrating to me that they're so smart.
Mm-hmm.
They could be using their intelligence for so many things.
Yes.
And yet, here we are.
Exactly. Such an asset to society, putting that brilliance to use. The question, can we stop serial killers before they kill if therapy doesn't work? And a lot of times the early warning signs are missed. What is the best way to stop a serial killer before they strike?
It doesn't really seem like there is one. People don't go to prison for intent to murder.
Right.
And that's not an efficient way to fix the issue anyway.
It would be nice if we could get better tracking of violent behavior, or Jeffrey Dahmer had that past arrest.
Mm-hmm.
If that had been spotted, maybe that teen wouldn't have been handed back to him.
Right.
If they're tracking animal abuse, that should be treated as a red flag.
Oh, definitely.
Mm-hmm. And then when someone has a history of escalating violent behavior, interventions.
Yeah.
When someone is caught in the early stages of an attempted crime like stalking or breaking into homes or assaulting people, maybe taking those cases more seriously, because let's be real, a lot of serial killers don't start with murder. They work their way up to it.
Thinking about this logically, we've probably arrested future serial killers before they kill, and we just don't even know it.
Absolutely. Think about all the criminals caught for things like stalking, breaking and entering, violent assault. Some of them have gone on to kill. Maybe if more attention was paid to those early warning signs, maybe it would save lives.
Interesting to think about, but it's also, I don't know, it's sad to think about.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
You can't put someone in prison for life.
No.
For something like that. You can't assume because they're stalking, they'll move on to murder.
Right.
I don't know what the answer is.
I don't know that there is one.
That's very true.
unfortunately.
Right. We might not be able to stop serial killers, but possibly catching them earlier if we get better at recognizing the early signs. And then you've also got things like DNA playing a role in helping people be caught sooner.
Yeah.
Here's the big question. Once a serial killer is active, how do we catch them? And that's where criminal profiling comes in. Next time, in part 2 in this series, we'll break down how the FBI builds psychological profiles, what crime scenes reveal about a killer's mind, and whether profiling actually works, or if it's just another Hollywood myth. You won't want to miss it.
I'm excited.
Me too.
Super interested to learn about all of that.
This series is going to be so good. We'll also talk about the psychology behind alibis. We'll talk about lie detector tests. We'll talk about criminal profiling.
I'm going to learn so much.
Yep. And I hope that you enjoyed this, and we'll come back for the next episode. Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of Crime Clueless. We truly appreciate you. If you are looking for resources we use in this episode, head over to our blog. You can find it linked on our website, crimeclueless.com, under the contributor section. We would love if you would follow us on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, YouTube. You can find episodes there, alerts for new episodes. We'd love to hear from you, your thoughts on, what we talked about today, nature versus nurture, McDonald triad. Connect with us, share your thoughts, theories, feedback. Also, if you have any true crime stories, we would love to feature them on an episode. Email us, crimeclueless@gmail.com. And remember, refuse to be clueless, careless, or caught off guard.
Not today, murderers.
Bye.